So this is the Akaso Brave 8 Lite. Essentially a budget version of this right here, the DJI Action 5 Pro. Right now, this is easily one of the best regular action cameras in the market, but it is expensive at around 300 bucks. And the Akaso Brave 8 Lite still records 4K video, has many of the same features, and it's about half the price. And if we go ahead and turn on both cameras, automatic settings, 4K 30, this is what you get.
This is the battery for the Akaso, and it reads a capacity of 1,550 milliamp hours. And side by side with the DJI battery, it's physically quite a bit smaller and holds 400 milliamp hours less capacity. So naturally, one of the first things I did was a battery life test using 4K 30 automatic video settings. And here, after 1 hour, the Akaso was down to about 1/3 battery, when the DJI still had 2/3 battery. And ultimately, the Akaso got to about 80 minutes before dying, at which point the DJI camera still had half battery. So clearly the DJI has much better battery life, but in all fairness, the Akaso is still pretty good, especially considering it comes with 2 batteries. And to give you guys a physical tour of both these cameras, you can see that on the outside, along with on the inside the software, these cameras are extremely similar. They both implement a tough, mostly plastic and slightly rubberized design, with flaps covering the battery door and the USB Type-C charging port on both cameras. You will notice that the Akaso physically it's a little bit smaller than the DJI and by extension the GoPro, so that could be a selling point, although it does mean that, as we saw, the battery is smaller and the screens are also quite a bit smaller. And when it comes to the quality on these screens, they're quite a bit less than most other action cameras. I definitely prefer to look at the screen on the DJI camera, but strictly in terms of functionality, they do work to allow you to frame your shot and adjust menu settings. Speaking of which, as I hinted at earlier, the menu here is almost identical to GoPro and DJI, but there is one fundamentally different thing about the Akaso when you compare it to GoPro and DJI, and that's the lack of a mounting point on the camera itself. The Akaso still requires you to put the camera inside of the included cage in order to just get a mounting point. And this is something that the action camera market has moved away from many years ago. So the fact that the Akaso still has this design, it's quite weird and definitely a negative of the camera.
All right, so this right here is the DJI Action 5 Pro. As always, automatic settings, the regular shooting mode. In terms of the field of view, we're using ultra wide with the regular stabilization. This camera does have probably the best image quality of any action camera on the market, with a fairly large 1/1.3 inch image sensor. So even in low and challenging lighting conditions, this camera really excels in just raw image quality and dynamic range.
And this is the same image, but now on the Akaso. And the reason why I'm doing a voiceover is because the microphone sounds like this.
And we are using the high bitrate setting to give this the best image quality possible.
But putting the audio aside, the image here is fairly okay. It is more flat and less colorful than the DJI, but the image still is pretty sharp, as it should be, being that it's 4K. And the stabilization, the electronic stabilization, I think is doing a decent job as I walk around, even though the field of view isn't nearly as wide as on the DJI. And that's a key thing about this camera, because I did try mounting it on my helmet to get that first-person view of myself riding my bike. And this is something I do pretty often with my Action 5. This is what that shot normally looks like. But when I put the Akaso in the same mount, this is the image that I get. We can see that the image is more flat and that the FOV is not nearly as wide, but other aspects like the sharpness and the stabilization are pretty okay.
Okay, this is a low light test side by side between the Action 5 and the Akaso Brave 8 Lite. automatic settings, 4K 30. We have the high bitrate on for the Akaso, and both have image stabilization turned on. It's not nighttime, but it's dusk. So we have some available light, but it definitely is getting dark.
Alright, so to give you guys my final thoughts, I think when it comes to the build quality, even the software, this is very comparable to other action cameras. But the image quality is more of a mixed bag. I would say the sharpness and the stabilization are pretty okay, but the field of view isn't that wide. The low light performance is pretty bad, and the built-in mics are not good at all. But the camera is half the price, roughly 150 bucks. So depending on what you need the camera for, you have to decide if that's worth it. I'll go ahead and leave a link below the video. I'll also leave a link to the last year's DJI Action 4, because if you can get that camera on a discount, that may be the best deal. But I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.